The light withdraws slowly from the land, not fading, but thinning, drawn out across fields and narrow roads until it no longer holds shape. What remains is a muted landscape where edges soften and distances become uncertain. The ground carries the memory of movement without revealing it. Grass leans where something once passed, then settles again without trace. Air rests close to the surface, cool and still, holding no direction of its own. There is no clear boundary between what can be seen and what must be remembered. Only a quiet condition persists, of paths existing and then not. For now, as the movement continues through spaces that do not hold it, you might take a quiet moment to subscribe, but only if this kind of calm, reflective history feels like something you'll return to again. And let us know where you're listening from, or which moment stays with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. Somewhere beyond the edge of that fading light, movement continues. It does not announce itself. It does not claim space. It adjusts, slows, and waits. A figure crosses a field not by the shortest path, but by the one least likely to be remembered. Footsteps are placed where the ground will not hold them for long. Grass bends, then rises again. Mud receives the weight and releases it without protest. There is no urgency in the motion, only precision, as if speed itself would attract attention. The body learns quickly that survival is not found in haste, but in the absence of pattern. You begin to notice how sound behaves differently in this hour. It does not travel freely. It lingers close to its source, dampened by distance and hesitation. A distant engine hums somewhere beyond sight, steady and indifferent, while closer to the ground, there is only the quiet exchange between fabric and air, between breath and cold. Even the smallest movement carries weight. A step too heavy, a branch disturbed too sharply, and the night shifts, not visibly, but in the way it listens. Silence here is not empty. It is attentive. She moves within that attention without breaking it. Her presence is not marked by uniform or rank, but by familiarity with what cannot be seen. The paths she follows are not drawn on maps. They exist in memory, in repetition, in the subtle alignment between landmarks that do not appear significant until they are all that remains. A fence post leaning slightly inward. A line of trees that breaks for just a few meters before continuing. The faint suggestion of a track where others have passed, careful not to leave proof. She does not look for these things as separate details. She moves as if they are already known. There are others who follow, though not closely enough to be mistaken for a group. Distance is maintained not out of distrust, but necessity. Each person carries their own uncertainty, their own attempt to understand where they are being led. Their clothing does not belong to them in any meaningful way. It has been given, adjusted, repurposed to dissolve identity rather than express it. Faces remain lowered, not in fear, but in discipline. To look too long, to search for reassurance, would be to interrupt the fragile agreement that holds them together. Movement replaces conversation. Direction replaces explanation. The ground begins to rise almost without warning. It does not declare itself as a boundary, only as resistance. Each step requires more attention, more intention. The air shifts, thinning slightly, carrying less warmth than before. Breath becomes visible for a moment, then disappears, as if even that must not remain. The path narrows, though it was never wide to begin with. Edges close in, defined not by walls, but by the absence of alternatives. There is no need to mark where to go. There is only the understanding of where not to step. You sense, without being told, that this movement is part of something larger, though nothing about it appears organized. There are no signals exchanged, no visible coordination, no structure that could be identified if seen from above. And yet it continues, repeating itself across distances and days, carried by individuals who do not see the whole, only their part within it. The system exists not in a single place, but in the quiet agreement that each person will do what is required, and nothing more. She pauses at a point that offers no obvious reason for stopping. The land does not change here in any visible way. There is no marker, no boundary, no shift in terrain that would suggest transition. And yet the pause is deliberate. It allows the distance behind her to settle, to stretch until those who follow are no longer immediate, only implied. It allows the space ahead to remain undisturbed, untouched by presence until it must be crossed. In that pause, time seems to loosen, no longer measured by progress, but by stillness. There are no words given. None are needed. The continuation of movement is understood, not instructed. One by one, the figures adjust, recalibrate, and follow the same invisible line forward. The night receives them again without acknowledgement. Nothing marks their passing. Nothing confirms their direction. The land remains as it was, unchanged in appearance, though something has moved through it with intention. Far from here, in places that still hold light, the war is spoken of in different terms. It is measured in advances, in losses, in territories gained and abandoned. It is mapped, recorded, and announced. But here, it is something else entirely. It is the narrowing of choices. It is the discipline of remaining unseen. It is the quiet understanding that survival depends not on strength, but on the ability to pass through a world that is no longer safe to occupy. And within that world, movement continues. The movement does not belong to a single night. It returns again and then again, each time carrying the same careful rhythm, though never in exactly the same way. What begins as a path becomes a pattern, and what becomes a pattern must then be concealed. Routes are not fixed. They shift, bend, dissolve, and reappear elsewhere, guided not by preference, but by pressure. A road that was safe yesterday may already be avoided today. A house that once opened its door without hesitation may now remain dark, not out of refusal, but because absence has already taken root there. The system adjusts without announcing itself. It survives by changing faster than it can be recognized. She moves through these adjustments without pausing to name them. There is no moment where the system is explained, no place where its boundaries can be seen. It is carried in memory, but not entirely. No one holds all of it. Each person remembers only what they must, and even that is held lightly, as if too firm a grip would make it visible. Instructions are given in fragments, often incomplete by design. A direction, a time, a place to wait. What comes next is not always known. The absence of certainty is not a flaw. It is a form of protection. You begin to notice how repetition alters perception. The first crossing of a field is marked by attention, by the careful placement of each step. The second feels more familiar, though no less dangerous. By the third, the body begins to anticipate the ground before it is seen, adjusting without conscious thought. This is not confidence. It is adaptation. The same silence that once felt heavy begins to feel necessary. The same darkness that obscured now begins to guide. The world does not become safer. It becomes more legible, though only in fragments. Those who move within it are not unchanged. The airmen who follow her carry something that does not belong to this landscape. Their posture, their hesitation, the way they measure distance, all of it reflects a world that operated differently, where movement was direct, and identity did not need to be concealed. Here, those instincts must be unlearned. They watch her not for reassurance, but for instruction that is never spoken. When she slows, they slow. When she stops, they do not ask why. Understanding comes not through explanation, but through repetition. There are moments when the system narrows to something almost visible. A doorway opened at the right time. A meal placed without comment. A bed offered for a few hours of rest that never fully arrives. These moments do not accumulate into comfort. They remain isolated, separated by distance and uncertainty. Gratitude is present, but it has no place to settle. It passes quickly, replaced by the need to continue. Even rest is temporary, shaped by the knowledge that staying too long creates risk, not safety. You can sense how fragile this arrangement is, not because it appears weak, but because it depends on so many unseen decisions. A single hesitation, a single misjudgment, and the pattern shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. A delay here, a change of route there. The system absorbs disruption by dispersing it, never allowing it to gather in one place. It survives not by resisting pressure, but by allowing it to pass through without breaking the whole. She carries none of this as burden in the way it might be expected. There is no visible strain, no outward sign that the weight of what she does accumulates. Instead, there is a kind of steadiness that does not come from certainty, but from repetition. The act of moving, of guiding, of continuing, becomes its own structure. It replaces the need for reassurance. It becomes the only form of clarity available. What lies ahead is not known, but the next step is. The night deepens, though it no longer feels like a change. It has settled fully now, no longer arriving, only remaining. The land has lost its edges entirely. What was once a field is now only space. What was once a path is now only direction remembered by the body. The figures within it move without leaving trace, guided by something that cannot be seen from above, cannot be recorded, cannot be easily described. And yet it persists, crossing borders that exist on maps but not always on the ground. Far beyond these movements, the war continues in ways that are visible, measurable, and loud. But here, it takes another form. It becomes the quiet negotiation between presence and absence, the decision to move instead of remain, the acceptance that safety is not a place, but a condition that must be maintained, step by step, without interruption. There is no moment where it is achieved fully, only moments where it has not yet been lost. Fields without direction. Morning does not arrive with light, but with a gradual thinning of darkness that reveals just enough to continue. The sky lifts first, though it offers no color, only a pale surface that reflects the cold rather than softening it. The ground remains unchanged. Frost settles along the edges of grass and stone, tracing outlines that had disappeared in the night. What was crossed hours before now appears again, but without the clarity that would make it familiar. Paths do not re-emerge. They remain implied, suggested only by the way the land yields under weight. She is already moving when the first signs of day appear. There is no moment of beginning, no visible transition from rest to motion. The body resumes what it had not fully stopped. Each step is measured not by distance, but by exposure. Open space is crossed with restraint, never directly, always at a slight angle that disrupts the line of travel. The direction is consistent, though it does not appear so. To an outside eye, it would seem uncertain, as if the movement is hesitant. But hesitation is not what guides it. It is adjustment, constant, quiet, and deliberate. Behind her, the airmen follow with a distance that is neither fixed nor accidental. They have learned, without instruction, how to maintain separation that protects without isolating. Too close, and they become visible as a group. Too far, and the connection dissolves. The space between them is not empty. It carries awareness, a shared understanding that must be held without being expressed. When one slows, the others do not call out. They sense it in the rhythm, in the slight shift of pace that travels backward through the line like a current. The fields stretch outward without interruption. There are no boundaries marked clearly enough to rely on. Fences appear, but not always where they are expected. Some stand intact, their wires taut and reflective in the faint light. Others sag or break, offering passage without indicating whether it is safe to take. She does not approach them directly. Instead, she moves along their length for a time, observing how they sit within the land, how they divide space that no longer belongs to those who built them. Only after this quiet observation does she choose where to cross. You begin to understand that movement here is not about reaching a destination. It is about maintaining a condition. Each decision is made not for progress, but for continuity. The path exists only as long as it remains unnoticed. Once it becomes clear, once it can be followed or predicted, it ceases to be usable. So it shifts, constantly, shaped by forces that are not always visible. Tracks in the soil are avoided, even when they would make walking easier. Roads are treated as edges, not routes. What is solid and defined is often what carries the greatest risk. The ground changes beneath their feet in ways that are subtle but persistent. Soft earth gives way to patches of stone that hold the cold longer than the surrounding soil. Moisture gathers in low areas, turning them into shallow stretches that must be crossed with care to avoid leaving marks that will remain after they pass. Footsteps are placed where the surface will not remember them. Grass is preferred to dirt. Shadows are preferred to open light. The body learns to read these differences not as obstacles, but as instructions. She does not turn to look behind her often. There is no need to confirm that they are still there. Their presence is assumed, carried in the rhythm of her own movement. When she does pause, it is not to check, but to allow. The space between them must be given time to adjust, to stretch or contract as needed. These pauses are brief, but they are not rushed. They hold a stillness that is active, attentive, as if the land itself is being listened to rather than crossed. The air remains quiet, though not entirely empty. Far in the distance, a sound emerges and fades, mechanical and steady, detached from the immediate surroundings. It does not approach, but its presence alters the way movement continues. Steps become more deliberate. The pace slows, not in response to proximity, but to possibility. Sound here does not need to be close to matter. It only needs to exist. The knowledge that something moves elsewhere is enough to change how one moves here. There are moments when the landscape offers a form of concealment that feels almost intentional. A slight dip in the ground that lowers the line of sight. A cluster of trees spaced irregularly enough to break visibility without forming a boundary. A rise that obscures what lies beyond without forcing a change in direction. These features are not rare, but they are not relied upon either. Each is used as it appears, then left behind without attachment. Nothing in this movement is permanent enough to depend on. You begin to notice how time is measured differently here. It is not counted in hours or distance, but in sequences of movement and stillness. A stretch of open ground. A pause near a boundary. A crossing that requires attention. A moment of rest that never fully becomes stillness. These sequences repeat, not identically, but with enough similarity that they form a pattern. And within that pattern, the body adjusts, conserving energy not by stopping, but by moving in a way that does not resist the terrain. The figures continue across the field as the light strengthens slightly, though it never becomes full. The world remains muted, its colors subdued, its edges softened. There is no point where the day feels established. It remains in transition, as if unwilling to fully reveal what lies within it. This uncertainty is not resisted. It is used. Visibility that is incomplete offers a kind of protection, allowing movement to continue without being fully exposed. She approaches another boundary, though it does not appear as one at first. The land narrows between two lines of growth, not dense enough to be called forest, but thick enough to limit sight. The ground beneath shifts again, becoming uneven, requiring each step to be placed with more care. There is no pause before entering. The movement adjusts as it arrives, adapting without announcement. The open field is left behind without marking its end. Behind her, the others follow, maintaining the same quiet discipline. No one speaks. No one signals. The system continues as it has, carried not by instruction, but by repetition. The land receives them, alters them slightly, and releases them again without acknowledgement. And still, the movement continues. The narrowing of the land does not bring shelter in the way it might seem. It changes the quality of exposure, not its presence. Where the fields allowed distance to soften visibility, this space concentrates it. The lines of growth on either side do not fully conceal. They interrupt, break, and distort, but they do not remove the possibility of being seen. Movement here must become smaller, more contained, as if each step is being folded inward rather than extended outward. The body adjusts again, not by stopping, but by reducing what can be noticed. She lowers her pace without signaling it. The shift is subtle, carried in the length of her stride, in the way her weight settles more carefully before lifting again. Those behind her follow the change without needing to understand it. The distance between them compresses slightly, though never enough to form a group. Space is still preserved, but it becomes tighter, more controlled. The air itself feels different here, held closer to the ground, moving less freely between the narrow lines of vegetation. Sound, when it occurs, remains longer, less willing to dissolve. The ground is uneven in ways that resist predictability. What appears firm gives way without warning. What seems unstable holds just enough to continue. Each step requires a brief negotiation, a moment where the body tests before committing. There is no frustration in this, only attention. The rhythm of movement slows, but it does not break. It becomes quieter, less defined by forward motion and more by the act of placing one step without consequence. You begin to notice how the absence of landmarks alters orientation. In the open fields, distance offered a kind of reference, even when direction was unclear. Here, everything exists at close range. The lines of growth repeat without variation, creating a space that feels continuous, without beginning or end. The path is not visible because it does not exist in a fixed sense. It is created as it is moved through, then disappears behind, leaving nothing to confirm that it was ever there. She does not search for direction in the way it might be expected. There is no scanning of the horizon, no visible attempt to locate a point ahead. Instead, she moves as if direction is carried internally, held not as a map, but as a sequence already known. The turns are slight, almost unnoticeable, yet they accumulate into a path that bends without appearing to do so. Those who follow do not question these changes. They experience them as shifts in movement, not decisions. There are moments when the space opens briefly, offering a wider view, though never for long. These openings are not used for rest. They are crossed with the same care as the narrower sections, perhaps more so. Exposure increases here, even if only for a few steps. The instinct to move quickly through them is resisted. Speed creates pattern. Pattern invites attention. So the pace remains steady, even when the land seems to allow more. A sound emerges again, closer this time, though still not immediate. It carries a rhythm that does not belong to this environment, mechanical and consistent, indifferent to the irregularities of the ground. It does not approach directly. It exists alongside, somewhere beyond the lines of growth, moving parallel or perhaps in a direction that only briefly aligns. The response is not to stop, but to refine movement further. Steps become softer. Contact with the ground is reduced where possible. The body shifts its weight more gradually, minimizing the disturbance of what lies beneath. She pauses once more, though the reason remains unseen. The space offers no clear indication of danger or transition, and yet the pause holds. It extends slightly longer than before, allowing the environment to settle, to reveal through absence what presence might disturb. Those behind her do the same, each within their own position, maintaining the distance that keeps them separate while still connected. In that stillness, the system becomes almost invisible, reduced to a series of quiet presences that do not announce themselves. You sense how much of this movement depends on what is not done, steps not taken, routes not followed, sounds not made. The discipline is not in action, but in restraint. Each choice removes possibility rather than creating it, narrowing the range of what could happen until only one path remains, the one that leaves the least trace. It is not the fastest, nor the most direct. It is simply the one that does not remain behind. The ground begins to level again, though the change is gradual. The uneven resistance softens, allowing the rhythm to extend slightly. The lines of growth thin, opening space in small increments that are barely noticeable at first. Light reaches the ground more fully here, though it remains subdued, filtered through a sky that never fully brightens. The transition out of this narrowed space is not marked. It unfolds slowly, as if the land is releasing them without drawing attention to the act. Behind her, the distance between the figures stretches once more. The space expands, returning to the careful separation that defined the movement across the fields. Each person adjusts without needing to see the others clearly. The system restores itself as the environment allows it, expanding and contracting in response to what surrounds it. Nothing is fixed. Everything responds. There is no indication of how far they have come, or how far remains. Distance is not measured here in ways that can be easily understood. It exists as accumulation, as the sum of movements that continue without interruption. The body carries this accumulation quietly. Fatigue does not arrive suddenly. It settles gradually, like the frost that had marked the ground earlier, spreading without announcement until it becomes part of the condition of movement. She resumes her pace fully as the land opens again, though the rhythm remains unchanged. There is no sense of transition, no moment where one phase ends and another begins. The movement continues as it has, shaped by what it passes through rather than by any internal shift. The path, if it can be called that, remains invisible, existing only in the continuation of steps that leave nothing behind. The figures move forward, not toward a visible point, but within a condition that must be maintained. The land offers no confirmation. It does not guide. It does not resist beyond what is necessary. It simply exists, receiving movement and releasing it again without acknowledgement. And in that quiet exchange, the system continues, unmarked and uninterrupted. Rooms that do not hold. The approach to the house is not direct. It never is. The path bends before it arrives, turning once, then again, as if the structure must be encountered without being aimed for. From a distance, it does not stand apart from the land. Its walls carry the same muted tones as the surrounding earth, its roof low enough to avoid drawing attention, its windows dark even in the growing light. There is nothing about it that invites notice. It exists as part of the landscape rather than within it. She slows before reaching it, though not in a way that would suggest hesitation. The pace adjusts just enough to allow the space around the house to remain undisturbed. There is a stretch of ground where nothing moves, where even the suggestion of recent passage must be avoided. The final steps are placed with greater care, not because the distance is small, but because proximity changes everything. What was once open movement becomes contained, defined by walls that do not offer protection so much as exposure of a different kind. There is no signal given, no gesture that would indicate arrival. She moves toward the side of the structure, not the front, where a door sits slightly recessed, its surface worn by use that cannot be measured by time alone. It opens before she reaches it fully, just enough to acknowledge presence without revealing the interior. The exchange that follows is brief, almost absent. A glance, a shift in posture, the smallest recognition that what is expected will continue. Inside, the air holds a different weight. It is warmer, though not comfortably so, and carries the layered scent of wood, fabric, and something prepared earlier that no longer lingers as a distinct smell. The room is small, defined by necessity rather than design. Objects are placed not for display, but for function. A table positioned close to the wall. Chairs that do not match but serve their purpose without question. A narrow bed or two, arranged in a way that allows movement without obstruction. Nothing is excessive. Nothing is missing in a way that draws attention. The airmen enter one at a time, each adjusting to the shift from open space to enclosure. Their movements become smaller, more contained, as if the walls themselves require a different form of presence. There is no relief expressed, no visible release of tension. Rest here is not safety. It is pause, temporary, measured, and always incomplete. They remove nothing that would mark them as separate from the condition they carry. Coats remain close. Shoes are not fully loosened. The body does not forget that movement will resume. You begin to notice how silence changes within these walls. Outside, it was expansive, stretched across distance and softened by space. Here, it is close, held between surfaces that reflect even the smallest sound back into the room. A chair shifting slightly. Fabric brushing against wood. The quiet intake of breath that cannot fully escape notice. Each sound is reduced, controlled, not eliminated. Silence here is maintained actively, not given freely. She remains standing for a moment after entering, not out of uncertainty, but to allow the room to settle around her. The transition from outside to inside is not immediate. It requires a brief stillness, a recalibration of presence. Only after this does she move further in, positioning herself in a way that maintains awareness of both the interior and the door. Her role does not change with the environment. It adapts. The person who opened the door moves with equal restraint. Their actions are deliberate but unremarkable, carried out in a rhythm that suggests familiarity without routine. A small portion of food is placed on the table, not enough to suggest abundance, but sufficient to sustain. Water is offered without ceremony. There are no questions asked, no visible attempt to gather information. The exchange is based on understanding that does not require articulation. Each knows what is expected. Each fulfills it without deviation. The airmen approach the table cautiously, not because they doubt what is given, but because the act of taking must be measured. Hands move slowly, avoiding contact that would create unnecessary sound. The food is consumed without urgency, though hunger is present. It is eaten in a way that preserves the condition of the room, maintaining the quiet that allows this space to exist without drawing attention to itself. You sense that time behaves differently here as well. It does not stretch as it did in the fields, nor does it pass unnoticed. It becomes concentrated, held within the walls as something that must be used carefully. Too long, and the space becomes dangerous. Too brief, and the body cannot recover what it needs to continue. There is no clear measure for how long to remain. The decision is made through signals that are not spoken, subtle changes in posture, in the way the person who owns the house moves, in the attention given to sounds beyond the walls. There are traces of life here that exist alongside this temporary presence. A garment folded neatly in a corner that does not belong to those who have arrived. A tool placed near the door, used for work that continues when this movement is not passing through. These details do not disappear. They remain, quietly asserting that this place has its own rhythm, one that must coexist with the function it now serves. The house does not become part of the system entirely. It accommodates it, briefly, without losing itself. She observes these details without focusing on them. They are noted, then set aside. What matters is not the life of the house, but how it holds this moment without breaking. The walls must remain ordinary. The room must not change in a way that would make it memorable. Everything that occurs here is shaped by that requirement. Even rest is contained within it. The air shifts slightly as someone moves near the door, not to open it, but to listen. The outside is never fully absent. It presses lightly against the walls, present in the faint sounds that reach through, distant movement, the suggestion of something passing beyond sight. These sounds are not interpreted immediately. They are allowed to exist, to be observed without reaction until their meaning becomes clear or fades entirely. The figures within the room remain as they are, each occupying a small portion of space without expanding into it. The system holds here, not through action, but through restraint. It pauses without stopping, gathers without settling, and prepares to continue without announcing when that continuation will begin. And within these walls, the condition of movement remains, quiet and unbroken. The room does not become familiar, even as the minutes pass. It resists that shift. Its walls remain neutral, offering no detail that can be held onto, no feature that invites recognition beyond what is necessary to move within it. The light, such as it is, filters in through a window that does not fully reveal the outside. It softens the interior without illuminating it, leaving edges undefined and surfaces muted. Nothing here is meant to be remembered. That is part of its function. She moves slightly within the space, adjusting her position not for comfort, but for alignment. From where she stands, the door remains within reach, the window within sight, and those who have followed her within quiet awareness. There is no central point in the room, no place that gathers attention. Presence is distributed, kept low, kept separate. Even proximity is managed. No one sits too close to another. No one occupies more space than needed. The room holds them without allowing them to settle into it. You begin to notice how rest takes a different form here. It is not the release of tension, but the suspension of movement. Muscles do not relax entirely. They remain ready, held just beneath the surface, prepared to respond without delay. The body lowers itself only partially, leaning rather than lying, closing the eyes without fully surrendering to sleep. Breath deepens slightly, but it does not slow enough to suggest comfort. Even stillness is active, maintained rather than given. The person who owns the house moves again, not toward those who have entered, but along the edges of the room, attending to tasks that are not directly connected to them. A cloth is adjusted on the table. A small object is repositioned near the wall. These actions are quiet, almost invisible, yet they carry weight. They maintain the ordinary rhythm of the space, ensuring that it does not become defined solely by what is happening within it now. The house must remain itself, even as it serves another purpose. There are no introductions. Names are not exchanged. Identity remains suspended, unnecessary for what is being done. The connection between those present is functional, precise, and limited. It exists only for the duration required. This absence of identity does not create distance. It creates protection. Without names, there is nothing to recall, nothing to reveal, nothing to carry beyond this moment that could compromise what continues elsewhere. You sense how much of this depends on mutual understanding that has never been spoken aloud. The airmen do not ask how long they will stay. The person who owns the house does not offer explanation. She does not provide reassurance. Each remains within their role, defined not by authority, but by necessity. The structure of this exchange is fragile, but it holds because nothing extends beyond what is required. Outside, something shifts. It is not a sound that demands immediate response, but it alters the texture of the silence. The air within the room tightens slightly, not visibly, but in the way attention gathers. Movement pauses, not completely, but enough to allow listening to take precedence. The person near the door stills. The small adjustments within the room cease. Even breath seems to align, becoming quieter, less pronounced. The sound does not repeat. It fades, leaving uncertainty in its place. No one reacts outwardly. There is no visible sign that anything has changed. And yet, the room does not return to its previous state immediately. The stillness holds for a moment longer, as if waiting for confirmation that will not come. Only then does movement resume, slowly, carefully, restoring the rhythm that had been interrupted. Time continues to pass within these walls, though it does not accumulate in a way that can be easily felt. It remains contained, shaped by the understanding that this space is temporary. The body senses this, even without instruction. Rest is taken in fragments, never fully, never deeply. Hunger is addressed, but not satisfied. Comfort is avoided, not because it is unavailable, but because it would create attachment. And attachment cannot be carried forward. She remains attentive to these shifts, though she does not intervene unless necessary. Her presence is constant, not dominant. It anchors the space without defining it. Those who follow her do not look to her for direction in this moment. They observe her instead, absorbing the way she occupies the room, the way she remains ready without appearing tense. This observation becomes instruction, though nothing is said. You begin to understand that this room, like the path before it, exists only as long as it remains unchanged. It cannot become a place of gathering, of conversation, of extended pause. The longer it holds them, the more it risks becoming visible, not through sight, but through the accumulation of presence. The system depends on these spaces remaining transient, used and then released without trace. The person who owns the house approaches the door once more, not to open it, but to place a hand lightly against its surface. It is a gesture that listens, that measures the outside without exposing the inside. After a moment, they step back, offering no signal, no indication that anything has altered. And yet, the shift is understood. The time within this room is nearing its end. She senses it before it is made explicit. There is a subtle change in her posture, a readiness that returns more fully, though it had never been absent. The pause that the room provided begins to dissolve, not abruptly, but in the same gradual way it was entered. Movement will resume soon, though the exact moment is not marked. It will emerge from the quiet agreement that has held this space together. The airmen adjust without instruction. Coats are gathered more closely. Positions shift slightly, preparing for departure without signaling it outwardly. The room remains unchanged, even as those within it begin to withdraw from it internally. They do not leave yet. They begin to stop being present. You watch as the space returns to itself, even before they have gone. The objects remain where they were. The light continues as it did. The walls hold no memory of what has occurred within them. This is how the system protects itself. Not by hiding entirely, but by leaving nothing that insists on being remembered. And as quietly as they arrived, the moment of departure begins to take shape, not through action, but through the subtle withdrawal of stillness. Hands that open without knowing. The door does not open immediately when they leave. There is a pause between the moment when departure is understood and the moment when it is enacted. It is brief, but it holds weight. Within it, the room completes its return to itself. The figures inside stand without forming a line, without arranging themselves in any visible order. Movement is delayed just enough to ensure that what follows will not overlap with what has just been. The system does not rush transitions. It separates them. When the door opens, it does so with the same restraint as before. Only enough space is created to allow passage, nothing more. Light enters, though it does not flood the room. It arrives carefully, filtered by the same muted sky that never fully brightens. The outside is revealed in fragments, a section of ground, a portion of wall, the faint suggestion of space beyond. There is no full view, no confirmation of what lies ahead. And yet, the movement continues into it. She steps out first, not as a leader in the visible sense, but as the continuation of what has already been established. The air shifts slightly as she crosses the threshold, carrying with it the colder presence of the open space. Those behind her follow with the same measured distance as before, each adjusting to the change without hesitation. The room closes behind them without sound. It does not mark their departure. It resumes its own stillness as if nothing has passed through it. The ground outside feels different from the fields they crossed earlier. It carries the imprint of use, though not in a way that forms a clear path. The soil is firmer in places, worn by repetition that has been carefully controlled. There are indications of movement here, but they are dispersed, broken, prevented from forming a single line that could be followed. The system leaves traces, but never enough to be read as a whole. They move away from the house without looking back. There is no need to confirm that it remains behind them. The space they occupied is already returning to itself, dissolving their presence as quickly as it allowed it. What lies ahead becomes the only point of attention, though it is not visible in any defined way. Direction is carried forward, not observed. You begin to notice how transitions between spaces are managed not by clear boundaries, but by gradual shifts in condition. The ground slopes slightly, altering the angle of movement. The air opens again, allowing sound to travel more freely. The distance between the figures expands once more, restoring the separation that reduces visibility. These changes are not announced. They are absorbed, integrated into the rhythm that continues without interruption. The landscape now holds signs of habitation at a distance. A structure appears far off, not close enough to define its details, but present enough to alter the route. She adjusts without approaching it directly, guiding the movement along a line that avoids alignment. The goal is not to reach such places, but to pass near them without becoming part of their pattern. Proximity is managed carefully, neither too distant to lose orientation nor too close to invite attention. There are others within this landscape who remain unseen but are nonetheless present. The system depends on them, though they do not move within it in the same way. They remain in place, embedded within the ordinary rhythm of the land. Their actions are not dramatic. A window opened at a certain time. A curtain drawn slightly differently. A tool left in a position that signals something without appearing to do so. These gestures are small, but they carry meaning that must be recognized without being acknowledged. She observes these signals as they appear, not by searching for them, but by allowing them to emerge within the field of attention. A slight change in a familiar structure. The absence of something that was previously there. These differences guide the movement as much as the terrain itself. They do not instruct directly. They suggest, and the suggestion is enough. Behind her, the airmen continue to adjust, though the process is not immediate. Their movements still carry traces of a different way of being, one that does not fully align with the conditions here. They correct themselves gradually, reducing the weight of their steps, narrowing their focus, learning to exist within the spaces that are not meant to be occupied openly. This learning is quiet, carried out through observation rather than correction. You sense how much trust is required for this to continue. Not trust in a person, but in a system that is never fully seen. Each step forward assumes that what lies ahead has been prepared, that someone has acted in a way that allows this movement to pass through without interruption. This trust is not confirmed. It is maintained through repetition, through the fact that the path continues to exist, even if it cannot be identified. The land begins to open slightly once more, though not into the wide fields of earlier. It offers a balance between concealment and exposure, a space where movement can continue without becoming fixed. The ground here is drier, holding fewer marks. The air carries less moisture, allowing sound to dissipate more quickly. These conditions are not chosen, but they are used. Each variation in the environment becomes part of the system, shaping how movement unfolds. She pauses briefly near a point where the terrain shifts again, not sharply, but enough to require attention. A shallow depression in the land creates a space that can be crossed or avoided. She studies it without stopping entirely, her pace slowing just enough to allow the decision to form. The crossing is taken, not because it is easier, but because it leaves less behind. The figures behind her follow, adjusting their steps to match the change without breaking the rhythm. You begin to understand that this movement is not guided by certainty, but by continuous correction. Each step responds to what has just occurred, not to what lies far ahead. The path is not planned in a fixed sense. It is maintained, held together through a tension that does not extend beyond what is immediately necessary. This limits risk, but it also limits knowledge. No one here sees the full extent of what they are part of. The figures continue across the shifting ground, their presence contained within the narrow conditions that allow them to remain unseen. The system moves with them, not as a structure that surrounds them, but as something that exists in the alignment between their actions and the world they pass through. And within that alignment, the next exchange begins to form, not yet visible, but already present in the quiet signals carried ahead. The distance between people. The house does not hold them for long. It never does. The time within it passes without accumulation, dissolving almost as soon as it forms. When they leave, it is not marked by readiness, but by necessity. The pause has fulfilled its purpose. The body has taken what it can without settling into comfort. The space has remained unchanged. That is enough. The door closes behind them with the same restraint as before, returning the structure to its quiet continuity, untouched by what has passed through it. Outside, the air feels wider again, though not entirely open. The land here carries a different rhythm, shaped by the presence of scattered habitation that cannot be avoided completely. Structures appear at intervals, separated by stretches of ground that offer partial concealment. The movement between them must be adjusted carefully, never aligning directly, never forming a line that could be followed from one point to the next. Distance becomes something to manage, not just in space, but between people. She moves ahead, restoring the separation that defines their passage. The figures behind her do not follow immediately. They wait for a moment that is not signaled, allowing the space between them to extend before closing it again. This delay is small, almost imperceptible, but it carries significance. It prevents continuity from becoming visible. It breaks the pattern just enough to keep it from forming. You begin to notice how distance operates as a form of protection. It is not absence. It is structure. Each person occupies their own segment of movement, connected to the others through rhythm rather than proximity. The space between them is filled with awareness, not emptiness. It holds the understanding that each must continue without relying on the presence of the others to confirm direction. The system depends on this separation. Without it, it would become something that could be seen. The ground shifts again, though not dramatically. It carries the subtle marks of use, faint impressions where others have passed, softened by time and weather. These traces are not followed directly. They are acknowledged, then avoided. What has been used once cannot be used in the same way again. Repetition must be varied, broken into fragments that cannot be assembled into a single path. The movement becomes a series of approximations, guided by memory but never identical to it. She adjusts her pace slightly, not in response to fatigue, but to the changing conditions of the land. The air feels heavier here, carrying sound differently, holding it closer to the ground. Even the smallest disturbance lingers longer than before. The body responds by reducing impact, by placing each step with greater care. Movement becomes quieter, more contained, as if the space itself requires it. Behind her, the airmen continue to adapt, though their adjustments remain incomplete. There are moments when their steps carry more weight than intended, when their movement extends slightly beyond the boundaries that have been established. These moments are brief, corrected quickly, but they reveal the ongoing process of alignment. This way of moving is not natural to them. It must be learned continuously, reinforced through repetition that does not allow for error to accumulate. You sense how this distance affects perception. Without close proximity, each person becomes less defined, more a presence than a figure. Details are lost. Identity dissolves into function. The system does not require individuals to be known. It requires them to move correctly. This abstraction is not dehumanizing. It is protective. It reduces what can be recognized, what can be remembered, what can be traced. The land begins to rise slightly, not enough to create a boundary, but enough to alter the angle of movement. From this elevation, even if minimal, the surrounding space becomes more visible. She does not remain there long. Height offers perspective, but it also increases exposure. The movement continues along a line that avoids both extremes, staying within the narrow range where concealment and awareness can coexist. There are moments when the distance between them feels almost too great, when the connection that holds the system together becomes difficult to sense. In these moments, movement becomes more precise, more intentional, as if the act of continuing is what maintains the link. No one calls out. No one signals. The connection is not reinforced through communication. It is sustained through shared adherence to the same condition. A sound carries across the land, faint but distinct enough to be recognized as human-made. It does not approach directly, but its presence alters the space in subtle ways. She responds not by stopping, but by adjusting the line of movement, shifting it slightly to reduce alignment with whatever lies beyond. The figures behind her follow this adjustment without understanding its source. The system responds as a whole, even when its parts do not perceive the same information. You begin to understand that distance is not only physical, it is temporal as well. Each person moves within their own moment, slightly offset from the others. What one experiences is not identical to what another experiences, even within the same space. This separation in time prevents synchronization that could be observed. It fragments the movement, making it more difficult to perceive as a single event. The ground levels again, returning to a more neutral state that allows the rhythm to extend. The figures continue forward, their presence distributed across the landscape in a way that resists consolidation. The system holds, not through proximity, but through the maintenance of these distances, these separations that define how it moves. She pauses briefly at a point where the land offers a slight depression, not enough to conceal, but enough to interrupt the line of sight. The pause is shared, though not simultaneously. Each person reaches it at a different moment, holds it briefly, then continues. The effect is subtle, but it disrupts continuity further, breaking the sequence into segments that cannot be easily reassembled. You watch as the movement unfolds across this fragmented space, each figure existing within their own portion of it, connected through something that cannot be seen directly. The system extends not as a line, but as a series of points, each carrying forward the same condition without needing to confirm its presence in others. And within that distance, the passage continues, quiet and unbroken. The distance does not remain constant. It expands and contracts in response to what cannot always be seen, shaped by small adjustments that ripple quietly through the line of movement. What begins as a careful separation becomes, at times, a widening gap that nearly dissolves connection altogether. Then, just as gradually, it narrows again, drawn back by the shared rhythm that holds the system together. No one decides this consciously. It happens through attention, through the way each person senses the space around them and responds without needing to confirm. The land here carries more signs of human presence than before, though none of them are direct. A distant structure appears briefly between lines of growth, then disappears again as the path shifts. A section of ground shows the faint alignment of previous passage, not recent enough to be followed, but not old enough to be ignored entirely. These signs do not guide the movement. They complicate it. Each one must be interpreted, then set aside, preventing the formation of a path that could be anticipated. She adjusts to these conditions without breaking pace. Her movement remains steady, though its direction bends in subtle ways that avoid alignment with anything that might be observed. The figures behind her follow these shifts without needing to see their purpose. The system does not rely on shared knowledge. It relies on shared behavior. Each person responds to the same condition, even if they perceive it differently. You begin to notice how awareness is distributed across the distance. What one person hears, another may not. What one sees, another may miss entirely. And yet, the movement remains coordinated, not through communication, but through the consistency of response. When the space requires quiet, it is maintained. When it allows continuation, it is taken. The system does not need to unify perception. It only needs to unify action. The air shifts again, carrying a faint sound that lingers longer than it should. It does not repeat, but it leaves an impression that alters how the next steps are taken. She slows slightly, not enough to stop, but enough to reduce the impact of movement. Those behind her follow, each adjusting in their own moment, creating a staggered response that further fragments the line. From a distance, It would not appear as a single adjustment, but as a series of unrelated movements, each occurring independently. The ground becomes firmer as they continue, holding fewer traces but offering less forgiveness. Each step must be placed more carefully, not to avoid leaving marks, but to avoid creating sound. The body responds by reducing force, by shifting weight gradually rather than decisively. Movement becomes quieter, but also more deliberate, requiring greater attention to maintain balance without disturbance. There are moments when the distance stretches to the point where one figure can no longer see another clearly. In these moments, movement relies entirely on internal direction. The connection is no longer visible. It exists only in the continuation of the path, in the assumption that those ahead and behind are maintaining the same condition. This absence of visual confirmation does not create panic. It is expected. It is part of how the system protects itself. You sense how this separation reshapes the experience of time. Without proximity, there is no shared moment that can be clearly defined. Each person moves within their own sequence, slightly offset from the others. What feels like a pause for one may already be a continuation for another. This fragmentation prevents the formation of a single narrative that could be observed from outside. It dissolves the movement into parts that do not align perfectly. The land rises again, though more gradually this time, offering brief glimpses of the surrounding space without fully exposing it. From these slight elevations, the distance between figures becomes more apparent, each occupying their own segment of the landscape. The system appears less like a line and more like a series of points, scattered yet connected through the direction they share. She moves through this space with the same steadiness, neither accelerating nor slowing beyond what is required. Her role remains unchanged, though it is less visible here. With distance increased, her presence is no longer a constant point of reference. And yet, the movement continues to align with hers, carried forward through the pattern that has been established. Behind her, the airmen continue to adapt, their movements becoming more consistent with the conditions around them. The weight of their steps lessens. The hesitation that once marked their adjustments fades slightly, replaced by a form of attention that no longer requires conscious effort. This change is gradual, almost imperceptible, but it alters the way they exist within the system. They begin to move not as those being guided, but as those who are learning to guide themselves within the same constraints. You begin to understand that distance is not simply a defensive measure. It is a form of transformation. It reshapes how individuals relate to one another, reducing reliance, increasing awareness, dissolving identity into function. What remains is not a group, but a structure of movement that persists even when its parts are separated beyond sight. A boundary approaches, though it is not marked in any visible way. The land shifts subtly, carrying a tension that does not belong to the terrain itself. The air feels more contained, as if something beyond the immediate space is exerting influence. She senses this change and adjusts accordingly, slowing just enough to allow the system to compress slightly, bringing the figures into a closer alignment without forming a visible group. The approach to this unseen boundary is managed with care. Movement becomes quieter, more deliberate, each step placed with an awareness that extends beyond the ground beneath. The distance between them narrows, not fully, but enough to maintain connection through a space that requires greater coordination. This compression is temporary, a response to conditions that will shift again once it has been crossed. You watch as the system adapts once more, altering its shape without losing its continuity. The figures move forward, their separation adjusted to meet the demands of the space, their rhythm preserved even as the distance changes. And within that shifting distance, the passage continues, carried forward by a structure that remains unseen, yet fully present. Lines that cannot be seen. The boundary does not appear in the way a boundary might be expected. There is no marker placed in the ground, no change in color or structure that announces its presence. The land continues as it has, carrying the same muted tones, the same uneven rhythm beneath each step. And yet, something shifts. It is not visible, but it is felt in the way movement begins to change before any clear reason can be observed. The air tightens slightly. The space ahead feels less open, though nothing has closed. She slows again, though the adjustment is smaller than before, contained within the length of her stride rather than the pace of her movement. It is enough to signal without signaling, enough to allow those behind her to respond without needing to understand. The distance between them narrows gradually, not to form a group, but to maintain connection through a space that demands greater precision. Separation is still preserved, but it becomes more controlled, less elastic. You begin to sense how the idea of a line, of a border, exists here without form. It is carried in the behavior of those who move near it, in the way their actions shift without instruction. The system recognizes the boundary before it is reached. It adjusts in anticipation, not in reaction. This anticipation is not based on knowledge that can be explained. It is based on repetition, on the accumulation of experience that has taught the body how to respond to spaces that carry greater risk. The ground beneath them remains unchanged, though it feels different. Each step seems to carry more weight, not because the surface resists, but because the consequences of disturbance increase. The body responds by reducing impact, by placing each foot with a care that borders on hesitation without becoming it. Movement slows just enough to allow attention to deepen, to extend beyond the immediate step into the space ahead. There are signs here, though they are not direct. A section of land where growth has been disturbed, not recently, but enough to suggest that others have passed through with the same caution. A faint alignment between distant structures that does not form a path, but hints at a pattern that must be avoided. These signs are not followed. They are interpreted as indicators of where not to move in the same way again. She approaches a shallow rise in the land, not high enough to offer a view, but enough to alter the line of sight. From this slight elevation, the space beyond can be sensed rather than seen. She does not remain there long. Exposure increases even with minimal height. The movement continues along a line that avoids both full concealment and full visibility, staying within the narrow range where presence is least likely to be noticed. Behind her, the airmen respond to this shift with greater attention than before. Their movements become more controlled, their adjustments more immediate. The learning that has been gradual now becomes more precise. Each step is measured not only against the ground, but against the condition of the space they are entering. The body begins to understand what cannot be explained. You begin to notice how silence changes again. It is no longer simply the absence of sound. It becomes something that must be preserved actively, protected from disturbance. Even breath is managed, drawn more quietly, released with less force. The body reduces its presence in ways that extend beyond movement, shaping itself to fit within the limits of what can remain unnoticed. There is a point where the land offers a brief depression, shallow but sufficient to lower the line of sight. She guides the movement through it without pausing, allowing the figures to pass one at a time, each maintaining their own space within the confined path. The depression does not conceal entirely. It interrupts visibility just enough to break continuity. This is enough. You sense how the system compresses here, not in structure, but in intensity. Each action carries more significance. Each decision is weighted more heavily. The margin for variation narrows, requiring consistency that has been built through the repetition of earlier movement. What was learned in the fields, in the narrow paths, in the rooms, now becomes essential. There is no space here for adjustment that has not already been practiced. The air shifts again, carrying a sound that is more distinct than those before. It is still distant, but it holds a clarity that suggests proximity to something structured, something that moves with intention beyond the natural rhythm of the land. The response is immediate, though not visible. Movement tightens. Steps become smaller. The distance between figures stabilizes, held within a range that allows coordination without forming a pattern. She pauses briefly at a point that offers no visible marker, yet holds significance within the system. The pause is shared, though not simultaneously. Each person reaches it at a different moment, holds it just long enough to align with what cannot be seen, then continues. The effect is subtle, but it disrupts continuity further, breaking the movement into segments that resist being assembled into a single event. You begin to understand that this boundary is not crossed in a single moment. It is approached, entered, and moved through gradually, without a clear point where one side ends and the other begins. The system does not acknowledge the boundary as a line. It treats it as a condition, one that must be navigated with sustained attention rather than a single decisive act. The ground levels again as they continue, though the tension within the space does not fully release. It lingers, carried forward even as the environment begins to shift subtly. The figures move through this condition without marking its transition, without signaling that anything has changed. And within that unseen line, the passage continues, quiet and deliberate, shaped by a boundary that cannot be observed, only maintained. The boundary does not end where it might be expected to. There is no moment of release, no clear shift where tension gives way to ease. Instead, the condition continues, stretched across distance that must be crossed without recognition. The land appears unchanged, yet the behavior it demands remains altered. Movement does not return to what it was before. It holds its restraint, as if the boundary extends further than the place where it was first sensed. She continues forward without signaling that anything has been completed. There is no acknowledgement of crossing, no pause that marks success or transition. The system does not celebrate passage. It absorbs it. What matters is not that a boundary has been moved through, but that the condition it imposed has been maintained without interruption. Behind her, the figures follow with the same measured distance, though the space between them begins to stretch slightly once more. The compression that held them closer together eases, not abruptly, but in small increments that allow separation to return without creating discontinuity. Each person adjusts in their own moment, restoring the distance that reduces visibility while preserving connection through rhythm. You begin to notice how the environment slowly reasserts its earlier qualities. The air opens again, allowing sound to dissipate more freely. The ground softens in places, holding less tension beneath each step. The need for absolute precision diminishes, though it does not disappear entirely. The body does not forget what it has just passed through. It carries that condition forward, allowing it to fade gradually rather than releasing it all at once. There are signs here that differ from those before, though they remain subtle. The alignment of distant structures shifts, suggesting a change in the pattern of habitation. The spacing between them increases, creating wider intervals of open ground that must be crossed with care. The system responds by extending its movement once more, allowing the figures to spread out further, reducing the risk of being perceived as a single entity. She adjusts her pace slightly, not to increase speed, but to allow the rhythm to extend again. The steps lengthen just enough to carry movement forward with less compression. The figures behind her follow this change, their movements becoming less constrained, though still controlled. The transition is gradual, shaped by the environment rather than imposed upon it. You sense how the memory of the boundary lingers within the movement. It does not disappear. It remains as a subtle influence, shaping decisions even when the immediate conditions no longer demand it. This memory is not conscious. It exists within the body, within the way each step is placed, within the attention that continues even when it might no longer be strictly necessary. The land offers a slight rise again, though this time it does not carry the same tension. From this elevation, the space ahead becomes more visible, though still muted by the quality of light that never fully clarifies detail. She moves across it without pausing, allowing the view to inform without exposing. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each crossing the same point at a different moment, preserving the fragmentation that defines their movement. There is a brief moment when the system feels almost ordinary, when the repetition of movement, the careful placement of steps, the management of distance begin to resemble something stable, something that could continue without disruption. This impression does not last. It cannot. The conditions that allow it are temporary, and the system does not rely on them. A sound emerges again, though this time it is softer, less distinct, carried across a greater distance. It does not alter the movement significantly. It is acknowledged, then absorbed into the rhythm that continues without interruption. The response is minimal, not because the sound lacks importance, but because the system has learned to differentiate between what requires adjustment and what can be allowed to pass. You begin to understand that crossing a boundary does not simplify what follows. It complicates it. Each passage adds to the accumulation of experience, increasing the number of conditions that must be held simultaneously. Movement becomes not just a response to the present, but an integration of what has already been encountered. The ground begins to shift once more, though not toward tension this time, but toward variation. Patches of softer earth appear alongside firmer sections, requiring continuous adjustment without breaking the rhythm. The body responds instinctively now, placing each step with a precision that no longer feels forced. What was once learned becomes part of the movement itself. She continues forward with the same steadiness, her presence once again serving as an anchor within the system, though less visibly than before. With distance restored, her role becomes more distributed, carried through the pattern that has been established rather than through direct reference. Behind her, the airmen move with greater consistency, their earlier hesitation reduced to occasional corrections rather than defining features. The process of adaptation continues, though it no longer appears as effort. It has become part of how they exist within this movement, shaping their actions without requiring constant attention. You watch as the system extends once more across the landscape, its structure intact, its rhythm unbroken. The boundary that was crossed leaves no visible mark, no indication that anything has changed. And yet, everything has shifted slightly, carried forward within the movement itself. The figures continue, their presence dispersed, their actions aligned, their passage leaving nothing that insists on being followed. And within that quiet continuation, the system holds, moving forward through a landscape that reveals nothing, yet shapes everything. Weight carried without measure. The land does not change in any way that can be easily named, and yet the movement begins to carry something heavier than before. It is not visible. It does not alter the shape of the figures or the line they maintain across the ground, but it settles into the rhythm of their steps, into the spaces between them, into the pauses that hold slightly longer than they did earlier. The body continues as it has, but the effort required to maintain that continuation increases, quietly and without declaration. She does not slow in a way that would suggest fatigue. The pace remains steady, the adjustments precise, the direction consistent. And yet, something within the movement has shifted. Each step now seems to draw from a deeper place, as if the repetition that once created structure now begins to demand endurance. The terrain has not become more difficult. The condition has. Behind her, the airmen carry this change differently. It appears first in the way their movements settle slightly heavier into the ground, in the brief delay between intention and action. These are small changes, easily corrected, but they accumulate. The system absorbs them, adjusts around them, but it does not remove them. They remain, part of the movement now, shaping how it continues. You begin to notice how fatigue here does not arrive as a sudden limit, but as a gradual redistribution of effort. The body does not stop. It compensates. Muscles that once moved freely begin to require more attention. Breathing deepens slightly, not in response to exertion alone, but to maintain the quiet that the condition demands. Even stillness begins to carry weight, no longer neutral, but something that must be held. The ground beneath them offers no relief. It remains varied, shifting between surfaces that require different forms of attention. Soft patches that demand careful placement. Firmer sections that require control to avoid sound. Each variation adds to the accumulation, not by increasing difficulty, but by preventing ease. There is no consistent rhythm that can be relied upon. Each step must be considered, even as the movement continues without pause. She adjusts in ways that do not reduce the demand, but redistribute it. The length of her stride shifts slightly, conserving energy without altering pace. Her posture remains unchanged, but the way she carries her weight becomes more efficient, reducing unnecessary movement. These adjustments are subtle, learned through repetition, refined through the need to continue without interruption. You sense how the system does not accommodate fatigue. It does not allow for rest beyond what has already been taken. It requires continuity. The movement must persist, regardless of the internal state of those within it. This is not imposed. It is inherent. The conditions do not change to meet the body. The body must adapt to the conditions. There are moments when the space offers the possibility of slowing further, of extending a pause beyond what is strictly necessary. These moments are not taken. They are recognized, then passed through. To remain too long in one place creates a different kind of weight, one that settles into the environment and risks becoming visible. Movement, even when difficult, remains the safer condition. Behind her, the airmen continue to adjust, their earlier uncertainty replaced by a more consistent form of effort. Their steps become more deliberate, not just to avoid detection, but to manage the increasing demand of movement itself. The learning that once focused on concealment now extends into endurance, shaping how they carry themselves across the ground. You begin to notice how the distance between them is affected by this shift. It does not collapse, but it becomes more fragile. Maintaining separation requires more attention, more control. There are moments when the gap narrows slightly, not by intention, but by the subtle slowing of one or the slight increase in pace of another. These moments are corrected quickly, but they reveal the strain that is beginning to influence the system. The air remains quiet, though it carries a density that was not present before. Sound behaves differently when the body is tired. It feels closer, more immediate, even when it is not. The perception of space alters slightly, making distances seem shorter, movements more noticeable. The system responds by maintaining the same discipline, even as the internal experience shifts. She pauses briefly at a point where the land offers a slight dip, not enough to conceal, but enough to interrupt the line of sight. The pause is shorter than those taken earlier, not because the need for stillness has diminished, but because the condition now requires continuation more than interruption. The figures behind her follow this adjustment, each holding the pause just long enough to align, then moving forward again. You sense how time begins to stretch differently under this weight. It no longer flows through sequences of movement and stillness with the same clarity. It becomes continuous, less segmented, less defined. The repetition that once structured it now blends together, making it difficult to distinguish one segment from another. The system continues, but the perception of its progression becomes less distinct. The land rises slightly again, though the change is gradual. From this elevation, the space ahead remains muted, offering no clear indication of what lies beyond. She does not pause to observe. The movement continues, carrying forward through the same careful adjustments that have defined it from the beginning. Behind her, the figures follow, their presence shaped now not only by the need to remain unseen, but by the effort required to continue. The system holds, though it does so with a weight that was not present before, carried quietly within each step. And within that weight, the movement continues, unbroken, sustained by a condition that demands endurance without measure. The weight does not settle evenly. It moves through the body in ways that are difficult to trace, shifting from one place to another without clear pattern. What begins in the legs spreads upward, carried through the spine, settling briefly in the shoulders before dispersing again. It does not remain long enough in one place to be named as strain. Instead, it becomes part of the overall condition of movement, something that is present everywhere without dominating any single point. She continues without visible change, though the efficiency of her movement becomes more pronounced. Each step is placed with a precision that conserves energy, reducing any motion that does not serve the continuation of the path. Her pace remains steady, but the way she carries that pace evolves. The rhythm becomes quieter, less defined by effort and more by necessity. It is not faster. It is simply more contained. Behind her, the airmen carry the weight less evenly. It appears in moments of slight imbalance, in the way a foot lands with more force than intended, in the brief hesitation before a step is completed. These moments are small, corrected quickly, but they reveal how the accumulation of movement begins to affect consistency. The system adjusts around these variations, maintaining its structure without requiring uniformity. You begin to notice how fatigue alters attention. What was once broad and responsive becomes narrower, focused more intensely on the immediate step. The space ahead is still considered, but less fully. Awareness contracts slightly, not from lack of discipline, but from the need to sustain precision in the present moment. The system continues to function, but the way it is experienced shifts inward. The ground offers no clear pattern to ease this condition. It continues to vary, requiring constant adjustment that prevents the body from settling into a single rhythm. Soft patches interrupt firm sections. Uneven surfaces require balance that must be maintained without visible effort. Each variation demands attention, and attention now carries its own weight. She adjusts again, though the change is subtle. The pauses between steps become fractionally longer, not enough to alter pace significantly, but enough to allow the body to redistribute effort more effectively. These micro-adjustments accumulate, preserving endurance without drawing attention to the strain they address. You sense how the system does not slow in response to fatigue. It refines. It reduces excess, removes unnecessary movement, sharpens what remains. The path becomes less about covering distance and more about maintaining the condition that allows movement to continue. Efficiency replaces ease. Precision replaces flexibility. There are moments when the space ahead offers the possibility of a longer pause, a place where the land dips slightly or where the line of sight is briefly broken. These moments are acknowledged, but they are not extended. The body might benefit from stillness, but the system requires continuity. To remain too long risks shifting the condition from movement to presence, and presence carries its own dangers. Behind her, the figures continue to adapt, their movements becoming more consistent despite the weight they carry. The hesitation that once marked their steps is replaced by a quieter form of effort, one that does not interrupt the rhythm, but becomes part of it. The learning that began with concealment now extends fully into endurance, shaping how they move through space without drawing attention to the effort required. You begin to notice how sound is affected by this change. The body, under strain, tends to create more disturbance, even when controlled. Steps that were once nearly silent now carry a faint suggestion of contact. Breath, though managed, becomes slightly more audible. The system responds by tightening control further, reducing these signals before they can accumulate into something noticeable. The distance between them remains intact, though it requires more attention to maintain. The tendency to close the gap increases slightly, driven by the natural pull toward proximity under strain. This pull is resisted, corrected through small adjustments that restore the separation without creating visible disruption. The system holds, but it does so with greater effort. The air shifts again, though not dramatically. It carries a faint coolness that was less present before, suggesting a change in elevation or the approach of a different terrain. This shift is absorbed into the movement, altering it slightly without requiring a change in direction. The body registers it, adjusts, and continues. She pauses once more, though the pause is brief and precise. It allows the system to recalibrate, to realign without breaking continuity. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause just long enough to maintain the pattern that prevents synchronization. The effect is subtle, but it preserves the fragmentation that protects the movement. You sense how the weight they carry is not only physical. It is cumulative, built from the repetition of movement, the constant attention, the sustained restraint. It does not overwhelm. It persists. It shapes the way each step is taken, the way each decision is made, the way the system continues without interruption. The land begins to change again, though gradually. The ground becomes more uneven, the air slightly thinner, the space ahead less open. These changes do not offer relief. They introduce new conditions that must be integrated into the movement without breaking it. The system adapts, as it always has, absorbing each variation into its structure. Behind her, the airmen continue forward, their movements now more aligned with the demands of the path. The weight they carry does not diminish, but it becomes more evenly distributed, less disruptive to the rhythm that must be maintained. And within that weight, the movement persists, shaped not by ease, but by the quiet determination to continue without leaving anything behind. Paths that rise without promise. The land begins to incline in a way that does not announce itself as a climb. It emerges gradually, almost unnoticed at first, carried in the slight shortening of steps, in the way the body leans forward without intention. What had been level becomes resistant, not through sudden change, but through accumulation. Each step lifts a little higher than before. Each movement requires a little more effort to maintain the same pace. The horizon does not shift dramatically. It simply feels further away. She adjusts without breaking rhythm. The length of her stride shortens slightly, not to reduce effort, but to maintain control over it. The ground beneath her becomes less predictable, its surface shifting between loose earth and exposed stone that holds the cold longer than the surrounding soil. Each step must be placed with care, not only to remain quiet, but to remain stable. Balance becomes part of the condition of movement, integrated into the same discipline that governs silence and distance. Behind her, the airmen respond to the incline with subtle changes that reveal the increased demand. Their steps slow fractionally, their breathing deepens slightly, though still controlled. The distance between them compresses almost imperceptibly, drawn inward by the shared effort of ascent. This compression is not allowed to settle. It is corrected gently, through small adjustments that restore the separation without creating visible disruption. You begin to notice how the upward movement alters perception. The space behind feels heavier, as if it resists being left. The space ahead offers no clear reward, no visible point that suggests arrival. The climb exists without promise. It continues because it must, not because it leads to something that can be seen. The ground becomes more uneven as they continue, its surface fractured in places where water has worn through the soil, leaving shallow channels that interrupt the line of movement. These channels are crossed carefully, each step placed to avoid loose stones that might shift under weight. The body adjusts instinctively, lowering its center of gravity slightly, distributing effort across muscles that must now work in coordination to maintain balance. She moves along a line that avoids the most direct path upward, guiding the ascent through a series of slight angles that reduce strain without extending exposure. The climb is not taken head-on. It is approached indirectly, allowing the body to continue without interruption. This adjustment is subtle, almost invisible, but it shapes the entire movement, preserving energy without altering pace significantly. You sense how the air changes with elevation, becoming thinner, carrying less warmth, altering the way breath moves through the body. Each inhale must reach slightly deeper, each exhale controlled to avoid unnecessary sound. The body adapts, though the effort required to do so adds to the accumulation already present. Fatigue does not intensify sharply. It deepens. There are moments when the ground offers brief stability, a section of firmer earth that allows steps to be placed with less caution. These moments are not extended. They are passed through without adjustment, as if remaining longer would disrupt the balance that has been established. The system does not seek comfort. It maintains continuity. Behind her, the figures continue to adapt, their movements becoming more synchronized with the demands of the incline. The hesitation that once marked their steps is replaced by a more consistent form of effort, one that integrates balance, silence, and endurance into a single action. The learning that began in the fields now extends fully into this new condition, shaping how they move without needing to think about it. You begin to notice how the distance between them becomes more difficult to maintain precisely. The incline draws them inward, compressing space in subtle ways that must be countered through deliberate control. Each person adjusts independently, restoring separation without breaking rhythm. The system holds, but it requires more attention to do so. The landscape offers fewer points of reference as they climb. The patterns of habitation that once appeared at a distance are no longer visible. The land becomes more uniform, defined by its elevation rather than by structures or boundaries. Direction is carried internally now, guided by the same quiet understanding that has shaped every step before. She pauses briefly at a point where the incline softens slightly, allowing a moment of recalibration without creating stillness that might draw attention. The pause is shared in sequence, each person holding it just long enough to align with the condition of the climb, then continuing upward. It does not reduce the effort. It redistributes it. You sense how the system transforms as it ascends. Movement becomes more contained, more focused, less influenced by external variation and more by the internal demands of the body. The environment shapes it, but the body now carries an equal role in determining how it continues. The ground rises further, though the change remains gradual. There is no crest in sight, no indication of where the incline will end. The movement continues as it has, shaped by the need to maintain balance, silence, and distance within a condition that demands all three simultaneously. Behind her, the figures follow, their presence drawn upward into a space that offers no clear destination, only continuation. And within that ascent, the system persists, moving through a landscape that rises without promise, sustained by a rhythm that does not break. The incline does not remain constant. It shifts in small, irregular ways that prevent the body from settling into a single rhythm. Sections that appear manageable give way to steeper ground without warning, then soften again before the effort can fully accumulate. This variation does not relieve the strain. It redistributes it, moving it through the body in ways that resist adaptation. What might have become familiar remains uncertain. She continues along the angled line she has chosen, allowing the climb to unfold in segments that reduce direct resistance. The path is not visible, but it exists in the sequence of adjustments she makes, slight turns that extend the ascent without exposing it. These turns are subtle, almost imperceptible, yet they shape the movement entirely, preserving the condition of control that the climb demands. Behind her, the airmen respond with increasing precision. Their steps align more closely with the ground, their balance steadier, their movements quieter despite the added effort. The earlier signs of strain do not disappear, but they become integrated, no longer interrupting the rhythm, but contributing to it. The body learns not to resist the incline, but to move within it. You begin to notice how the upward movement alters the relationship between effort and sound. The body, working harder, tends to create more disturbance, yet the condition requires that this be minimized. Each step must carry weight without announcing it. Each shift in balance must occur without breaking the silence that surrounds them. This contradiction is managed through control that extends beyond conscious thought, shaping movement into something that feels both deliberate and automatic. The ground becomes more fractured as they continue, the soil thinning in places where stone pushes through, creating surfaces that require careful placement to avoid slipping. These stones hold the cold differently, altering the sensation beneath each step. The body adjusts instinctively, distributing weight more evenly, reducing the risk of imbalance without slowing the pace beyond what is necessary. There are moments when the incline offers a brief plateau, a section where the ground levels just enough to allow the body to extend slightly. These moments are brief and uneven, never long enough to restore ease. They are used without being relied upon, passed through with the same discipline that governs the climb. The system does not allow itself to anticipate relief. You sense how the distance between them becomes more difficult to maintain under these conditions. The incline draws them inward again, compressing space in ways that must be countered through careful adjustment. Each person manages this independently, restoring separation without breaking the rhythm that connects them. The system holds, though the effort required to maintain it increases. The air grows thinner still, though the change is subtle. Breath must reach deeper, drawn with greater care to avoid creating sound. The body responds by slowing the rate of inhalation and exhalation, extending each cycle slightly to maintain quiet. This adjustment adds to the effort, but it preserves the condition that allows the movement to continue unseen. She pauses again, though the pause is shorter than before, more precise. It allows the body to realign without fully resting, to redistribute effort without releasing it. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause just long enough to maintain the pattern that prevents synchronization. The effect is subtle, but it preserves the fragmentation that protects the movement even in this more confined space. You begin to understand how the climb transforms not only the body, but the perception of progress. Distance becomes difficult to measure. The upward movement obscures what has been covered, while offering no clear indication of what remains. The horizon, when it appears, does not provide orientation. It simply extends the sense of continuation. The landscape around them becomes more uniform as they ascend, its features reduced to variations of elevation and texture. The absence of distinct landmarks removes external reference points, forcing reliance on internal direction. The system continues, guided not by what can be seen, but by what has been learned through repetition. Behind her, the airmen move with a consistency that was not present before. Their earlier adjustments have settled into a rhythm that aligns more closely with the demands of the climb. The weight they carry does not diminish, but it becomes more evenly distributed, less disruptive to the movement that must be maintained. The incline begins to soften again, though only slightly, offering a change in resistance that must be absorbed without altering pace significantly. The body responds by extending its movement just enough to accommodate the shift, preserving continuity while adjusting to the new condition. You watch as the system persists through this rising terrain, its structure intact, its rhythm unbroken despite the increasing demands placed upon it. The climb offers no promise of arrival, no visible point where effort will cease. It continues because it must, carried forward by a discipline that does not depend on outcome. And within that ascent, the movement holds, sustained by a quiet endurance that leaves no trace behind. Trust without faces. The incline eases, though the body does not immediately recognize the change as relief. The effort that has been carried upward does not release at once. It lingers, held within muscles that continue to expect resistance even as the ground softens beneath them. Steps extend slightly, but cautiously, as if the absence of strain might be temporary. The rhythm adjusts, but it does not return to what it was before. It becomes something quieter, shaped by what has already been endured. She moves forward along a line that now feels less constrained by the terrain, though not by the condition. The space ahead opens just enough to allow distance to stretch again, restoring the separation that had been compressed during the climb. The figures behind her follow this shift gradually, each adjusting in their own moment, allowing the system to expand without forming a pattern that could be seen. The land here carries fewer visible signs of habitation, yet the presence of others is more deeply embedded within it. It is not marked by structures alone, but by subtle indications that something has been arranged, prepared, left in a way that suggests intention without revealing it. A gate that rests slightly ajar, though no immediate path leads through it. A section of ground where the grass lies differently, not from recent passage, but from something that has been placed and removed over time. You begin to notice how these signs do not announce themselves. They must be recognized without being searched for. To look too directly would risk missing them entirely. They appear within the periphery of attention, revealed only when the movement remains steady, unforced, aligned with a quiet rhythm that allows such details to emerge. She adjusts her direction slightly in response to one of these indications, though the change is minimal, carried within the continuation of her steps rather than marked by a visible turn. The figures behind her follow this adjustment without knowing its source. The system responds as a whole, even when its parts do not share the same awareness. There are no faces here that can be clearly seen, no individuals who step forward to confirm their role within the movement. And yet, the presence of others is undeniable. It exists in the way the environment aligns with what is needed, in the way certain spaces offer passage while others resist it. This presence does not require recognition. It requires trust. You sense how this trust differs from what has come before. It is no longer confined to the moment of entering a room, to the exchange between those who open doors and those who pass through them. It extends beyond that, into a network that cannot be seen in its entirety. Each step forward assumes that something has been prepared, that someone has acted in a way that allows the movement to continue without interruption. The ground beneath them reflects this quiet arrangement. It offers paths that are not fixed, but suggested, shaped by patterns that shift over time. These paths are not followed directly. They are used in fragments, approached from angles that prevent them from becoming visible as routes. The system does not rely on consistency. It relies on variation within familiarity. She moves through this space with the same measured precision, though her attention now extends beyond the immediate terrain. It reaches into the subtle shifts that indicate whether the next passage will hold. A door that may open, a space that may receive. These possibilities are not confirmed until they occur, and yet they guide the movement as surely as the ground beneath her feet. Behind her, the airmen continue to adapt, their movements now more aligned with the system that carries them. The earlier uncertainty has diminished, replaced by a quieter form of awareness that allows them to respond without hesitation. They do not seek confirmation. They follow the pattern, trusting that it will continue to hold. You begin to understand how this trust is built not through knowledge, but through repetition. Each successful passage reinforces the belief that the next will be possible. This belief is not expressed. It is carried silently, shaping the way each step is taken, the way each pause is held. The land shifts again, though gently, offering a series of shallow rises and dips that require continuous adjustment without disrupting the rhythm. These variations are absorbed into the movement, shaping it without altering its pace significantly. The body responds instinctively now, placing each step with a precision that no longer feels forced. She pauses briefly near a point where the ground narrows between two lines of growth, not dense enough to conceal entirely, but sufficient to interrupt visibility. The pause is not for rest. It is for alignment, allowing the system to gather itself before passing through a space that requires closer coordination. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause just long enough to maintain the pattern that prevents synchronization. The effect is subtle, but it preserves the fragmentation that protects the movement even as the space narrows. You watch as the system prepares to enter another phase of passage, one that will depend not only on the terrain, but on the unseen presence that has guided it thus far. The trust that holds it together is not reinforced here. It is assumed. And within that assumption, the movement continues, carried forward by connections that remain without faces. The narrowing between the lines of growth does not close completely, but it reshapes the space in a way that alters how trust is carried. What had been distributed across distance now concentrates slightly, not enough to form a group, but enough to require closer alignment. The system compresses again, though more quietly than before, guided not only by the terrain, but by the unseen coordination that allows passage to continue without interruption. She moves into the narrowed space without hesitation, though her pace adjusts to accommodate the change. The steps become smaller, more contained, reducing the movement that might be noticed within a space where visibility is partially restricted. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each maintaining their position within the compressed structure, preserving the separation that prevents them from becoming a single, identifiable presence. You begin to notice how trust here is not reinforced through interaction. There are no exchanges, no confirmations that what lies ahead is prepared. Instead, it exists as a continuity that has not yet been broken. The system moves forward because it has continued to do so. The absence of failure becomes the only assurance available. The ground within this narrowed space carries subtle variations that must be navigated carefully. Roots rise just beneath the surface, creating uneven footing that requires balance without visible adjustment. Patches of softer earth appear where moisture has gathered, holding the potential to leave marks if crossed without care. Each step is placed with precision, not only to maintain silence, but to preserve the condition that allows the system to remain unseen. There are moments when the space opens slightly, offering a brief extension of visibility that is not fully trusted. These openings are crossed with the same restraint as the narrower sections, as if they carry equal risk. The system does not differentiate between what appears open and what appears concealed. It responds to both with the same discipline, ensuring that no part of the movement becomes predictable. She pauses again, though the pause is brief and deliberate, held at a point where the ground shifts just enough to require attention. The pause allows the system to realign, to ensure that the compression of space has not disrupted the rhythm that connects each figure. Those behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause within their own moment, preserving the fragmentation that prevents synchronization. You sense how trust extends beyond the immediate environment, reaching into the spaces that have not yet been encountered. Each step forward assumes that the next passage will hold, that the unseen network will continue to align with the movement. This assumption is not based on certainty. It is sustained by necessity. The air shifts slightly, carrying a faint change in temperature that suggests the approach of another transition. It is not abrupt, but it alters the texture of the space enough to be noticed. The body responds without conscious thought, adjusting movement to accommodate the subtle change, preserving the quiet that defines the passage. Behind her, the airmen continue to move with a consistency that reflects their adaptation to the system. Their earlier uncertainty has been replaced by a quieter form of attention, one that does not require constant correction. The learning that began with observation has become integrated into their movement, shaping how they exist within the space without drawing attention to the effort involved. You begin to understand how the absence of faces within this system does not create distance. It creates a form of connection that is less visible, but more resilient. Without identity, there is nothing to recognize, nothing to remember beyond the function that each person fulfills. The system persists not because individuals are known, but because roles are maintained. The narrowed space begins to open again, though gradually, releasing the compression that has shaped the movement. The distance between figures extends once more, restoring the separation that reduces visibility while preserving the rhythm that connects them. The transition is smooth, absorbed into the continuation of movement without creating a break. She adjusts her pace slightly as the space expands, allowing the rhythm to extend again. The figures behind her follow this change, their movements becoming less constrained, though still controlled. The system returns to a wider form, its structure intact, its continuity unbroken. You watch as the movement carries forward into this more open terrain, guided by the same unseen connections that have sustained it thus far. The trust that holds it together remains unspoken, unconfirmed, yet fully present in the way each step aligns with what has been prepared beyond sight. And within that trust, the system continues, moving through a landscape that reveals nothing, yet provides everything required for its passage. Nights that do not end. The light does not fade all at once. It thins slowly, as if the day is being drawn away rather than replaced. The sky lowers again into a pale, indefinite surface that offers no warmth, only a dim continuation of visibility that cannot be relied upon. Shapes soften, edges lose their certainty. What had been distinguishable becomes suggestion. The land does not change, and yet it begins to feel less knowable, less willing to reveal what lies within it. She continues without pause as the light recedes. The transition into night is not marked by stopping, but by adjustment. Steps shorten slightly, not to slow the pace, but to maintain control as the ground becomes less certain. The body adapts to the diminishing clarity, relying less on sight and more on memory, on the internal sense of direction that has been carried from one segment of movement to the next. Behind her, the figures follow with the same measured distance, though the space between them becomes more difficult to perceive. They are no longer clearly visible to one another. Their presence is sensed rather than seen, carried through the rhythm of movement that continues without interruption. The system holds, even as visibility fades. You begin to notice how the night alters sound. It does not silence it. It reshapes it. What is near becomes more pronounced, while what is distant recedes into indistinct layers that cannot be easily separated. A step placed slightly heavier than intended carries further than it did in the day. A shift in fabric creates a sound that lingers longer in the absence of competing noise. The body responds by tightening control, reducing each movement to its smallest necessary form. The ground beneath them becomes less predictable as darkness deepens. Variations that were once visible must now be anticipated. The body adjusts, placing each step with greater caution, testing the surface before committing weight fully. This slows the rhythm slightly, though not enough to interrupt it. Movement continues, shaped by uncertainty that cannot be fully resolved. She moves as if the path remains visible, though it does not. The direction she carries does not rely on what can be seen. It exists as a continuation of what has already been established, held within the repetition of movement that has not yet been broken. Each step follows the last, not because the ground confirms it, but because the pattern has been maintained. You sense how the night extends beyond time. It does not feel like a segment that will pass. It feels continuous, as if the movement will remain within it without transition. The absence of clear markers, of light, of shadow, of distance, removes the usual measures that define progression. What remains is the act of continuing, sustained without reference to beginning or end. The air grows colder as the darkness settles fully, though the change is gradual. It moves through fabric and skin without sharpness, spreading evenly rather than striking in bursts. Breath becomes visible again, though only briefly, dissipating before it can linger. Each exhale must be controlled, not to conceal it entirely, but to prevent it from becoming a pattern that might be noticed. Behind her, the airmen adjust to this condition with varying degrees of precision. Their movements, already shaped by repetition, now rely more heavily on internal awareness. Without visual confirmation, each step must be taken with confidence that is not supported by sight. The hesitation that once appeared in their movement shifts again, becoming less visible, replaced by a quieter form of caution. You begin to notice how the distance between them is maintained differently in the dark. It is no longer measured by sight, but by rhythm. Each person moves within a sequence that aligns with the others without requiring direct confirmation. The spacing is preserved through timing, through the consistent interval between steps, pauses, and adjustments. The system adapts, preserving separation without relying on visibility. The land offers fewer cues now, its features absorbed into the darkness. Slight rises and dips can still be felt beneath the feet, but they no longer provide orientation. Direction becomes internal, carried forward through the same quiet understanding that has guided every movement thus far. The absence of visual markers does not halt the system. It reshapes it. She pauses briefly, though the pause is harder to perceive in the dark. It is held within the rhythm rather than outside it, a slight extension of stillness that allows the system to realign. Those behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause within their own moment, preserving the fragmentation that prevents synchronization. You sense how the night demands a different form of endurance. It is not only physical, it is perceptual. The body must continue without the reassurance of sight, without the confirmation that each step aligns with what lies ahead. This absence does not create panic. It creates a deeper reliance on the pattern that has been established. The ground beneath them shifts again, though the change is subtle. A section of softer earth interrupts the firmer surface, requiring adjustment without visual confirmation. The body responds instinctively, redistributing weight, preserving balance without visible correction. Movement continues, shaped by the same discipline that has carried it through every condition. Behind her, the figures follow, their presence now reduced to the faintest suggestion within the darkness. The system persists, not because it can be seen, but because it has not yet been broken. And within that night, the passage continues, unmarked by light, sustained by a rhythm that does not end. The darkness deepens, though it is difficult to say when it has fully arrived. It does not settle into a single state. It shifts, subtly, altering the way the land is perceived without ever revealing itself completely. What had been faintly visible disappears, then reappears in suggestion, then dissolves again. The eye searches, but it is no longer the primary guide. Movement depends on something quieter now, something carried beneath sight. She continues without altering her pace, though the precision of each step becomes more contained. The ground is no longer read in detail. It is sensed through contact, through the way the surface responds to weight before it is fully placed. Each step tests, then commits, allowing the body to adapt without interruption. The rhythm remains, though it is shaped more by touch than by vision. Behind her, the figures follow within this same condition, their presence reduced to intervals within the movement. They are no longer seen clearly, only inferred through the continuation of steps that align with a pattern already established. The system persists, not through visibility, but through consistency. Each person moves as if the others are present, even when they cannot be confirmed. You begin to notice how sound replaces sight as the primary form of orientation, not in a way that reveals position directly, but in the way it shapes awareness. The faint contact of foot against ground, the controlled release of breath, the slight shift of fabric carried by movement. These sounds do not guide direction, but they confirm continuation. They reassure without announcing. The air holds these sounds differently now. It absorbs them, then returns them in softened echoes that do not travel far. What is near becomes clearer. What is distant fades into indistinct layers that cannot be separated. This compression of sound reduces the range of awareness, focusing it inward, narrowing the field within which the system operates. She pauses again, though the pause blends into the rhythm so completely that it is difficult to distinguish from movement. It is held just long enough to allow the body to recalibrate, to realign with the condition of darkness without breaking the continuity that must be preserved. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each pausing within their own moment, maintaining the fragmentation that prevents synchronization. You sense how the absence of light alters the perception of time. Without visual markers, without the gradual shift of shadow and color, time loses its usual structure. It becomes continuous, unbroken, defined only by the repetition of movement. The system continues, but its progression cannot be measured in the same way. It exists as duration rather than sequence. The ground beneath them changes again, though the difference is subtle. A slight incline emerges, not enough to be recognized immediately, but enough to alter the distribution of effort. The body adjusts without conscious thought, leaning forward slightly, redistributing weight to maintain balance. The movement continues, shaped by this new variation without interruption. Behind her, the airmen adapt to this shift with increasing consistency. Their earlier reliance on sight has diminished, replaced by a quieter form of awareness that allows them to move within the darkness without hesitation. The learning that began with observation has now become internalized, guiding their actions even when external reference is absent. You begin to understand how the night extends beyond environment. It becomes a condition within the body, shaping perception, altering response, redefining what is necessary for movement to continue. The absence of light does not stop the system. It refines it, reducing it to its essential components: step, breath, pause, continuation. There are moments when the darkness feels almost complete, when even the suggestion of form disappears entirely. In these moments, movement becomes more deliberate, more contained, as if the body is navigating through space that offers no confirmation at all. The system holds, carried by the pattern that has not yet been broken. A faint change in the air suggests the presence of open space ahead, though it cannot be seen. The density of the darkness shifts slightly, offering a sense of expansion that must be approached with caution. She adjusts her movement accordingly, not by slowing significantly, but by refining the placement of each step to account for what cannot yet be confirmed. The figures behind her follow this adjustment, each responding within their own moment, preserving the structure that allows the system to remain unseen. The distance between them is maintained through rhythm alone, each step aligned with a pattern that continues without visual confirmation. You watch as the movement persists through this unbroken night, its structure intact, its rhythm sustained despite the absence of light. The system does not rely on visibility. It relies on continuity. As long as the pattern holds, the movement can continue. And within that darkness, the passage extends, carried forward without end, sustained by a quiet precision that leaves nothing behind. When the system breaks. The break does not begin with noise. It begins with absence. A segment of movement that should continue does not. The rhythm carries forward as it has through fields, through rooms, through the narrowing of unseen lines and the long extension of night. Step follows step. Distance holds. Breath remains controlled. The system continues in the same quiet pattern that has sustained it across every condition. And yet, within that pattern, something fails to return. She does not stop immediately. The movement continues for several steps beyond the point where the absence first registers, carried by the inertia of repetition. The body does not react to interruption at once. It expects continuity. It assumes alignment. Only after the pattern fails to restore itself does the adjustment begin. Her pace shortens, not to halt, but to reduce forward extension. The steps become smaller, contained, allowing time to settle around the absence without drawing attention to it. The distance ahead remains unchanged. The space behind, however, no longer holds the same structure. Something has shifted within it, though nothing has been seen, nothing has been heard. You begin to sense how the system depends on what returns, not just on what moves forward. Each figure maintains their place not through sight, but through the repetition of presence. When that repetition breaks, it is not immediately visible. It is felt in the disruption of rhythm, in the absence of confirmation that should exist within the pattern. She pauses, but the pause is not held in stillness. It is embedded within the movement, extended just enough to allow the system to respond without becoming fixed. The figures behind her, those still aligned within the pattern, reach this pause in their own sequence, holding it briefly, then continuing. The system does not collapse. It adjusts. There is no turning back. The absence is not approached directly. To reverse movement would create a different pattern, one that could be observed, one that would concentrate presence in a way that the system cannot sustain. Instead, the response unfolds within the continuation. The missing segment is not retrieved. It is absorbed. You begin to notice how the environment reflects nothing of what has occurred. The ground remains as it was. The air carries no change. The darkness holds its same quiet depth. There is no sign that something has broken. And yet, within the movement, the shift is absolute. She continues forward, though the precision of her steps tightens further. Each placement becomes more deliberate, not because the terrain has changed, but because the condition now requires greater control. The system must maintain itself without the part that has been lost. Behind her, the remaining figures adjust without knowing fully what has occurred. Their movements become more contained, their attention sharpened by something that has not been named. The rhythm shifts slightly, not enough to break, but enough to indicate that the pattern is no longer complete. You sense how the absence creates a different form of weight. It is not physical. It does not alter the body's movement directly. It alters the structure within which that movement exists. The system is no longer whole. It continues, but it does so with a gap that cannot be filled. There are no words exchanged, no signal given that confirms what has happened. The system does not acknowledge the break in a way that can be seen. It continues as if continuity still holds, even as it adjusts around what is missing. The ground begins to shift again, though subtly. A slight variation in surface requires attention, but it is absorbed into the movement without disruption. The body continues to respond to the environment as it has before, maintaining the discipline that allows passage to remain unseen. You begin to understand that the system cannot stop for loss. It cannot pause long enough to account for it. To do so would expose it, concentrate it, make it visible in a way that would threaten everything that remains. So it continues, carrying the absence forward as part of its condition. She pauses once more, though the pause is brief and precise. It allows the system to realign around the gap, to redistribute the structure that has been altered. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause within their own moment, preserving the fragmentation that protects the movement. The absence remains. It does not resolve. It does not diminish. It becomes part of the system itself, shaping how it continues without ever being addressed directly. And within that altered structure, the movement persists, carrying forward through a pattern that no longer returns fully, yet does not break. The absence does not remain isolated. It begins to influence the movement in ways that are not immediately visible, spreading quietly through the structure that continues to hold. What was once a stable rhythm now carries slight variations, subtle enough to be absorbed, but present in the way each step is placed, in the way each pause is held. The system does not fracture openly. It adjusts around what has been lost. She continues forward without altering direction, though the precision of her movement becomes more contained. Each step is placed with an attention that extends beyond the ground, reaching into the pattern itself, reinforcing what remains intact. The absence behind her does not change where she moves, but it changes how she moves within it. Behind her, the figures follow, their movements shaped by a condition they do not fully perceive. The gap that has formed is not visible to them in its entirety. It exists as a slight misalignment, a disruption in the sequence that does not announce itself clearly. And yet, it influences them. Their steps become more deliberate, their pauses more controlled, as if responding to something that has not been named. You begin to notice how the environment remains unchanged, offering no reflection of the disruption within the system. The land continues as it has, indifferent to what has occurred. The ground receives each step without marking the difference. The air carries sound without distinction. There is no external sign that the pattern has been altered. The system continues to compress and expand as required by the terrain, though now these adjustments carry a different weight. The distance between figures must be maintained with greater care, as the absence creates a subtle imbalance. Where one segment is missing, the spacing must be recalibrated to preserve the appearance of continuity. She pauses again, though the pause is shorter than before, more precise, as if the system cannot afford extended stillness in this condition. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause within their own moment, maintaining the fragmentation that prevents synchronization. The effect is consistent, though the internal structure has shifted. You sense how the absence alters perception. What was once a continuous movement now feels slightly fragmented, even if the pattern remains intact. Each segment becomes more defined, more separate, as if the connection between them has been weakened, though not broken. There are moments when the gap behind seems to close, when the rhythm almost restores itself fully. These moments do not hold. The absence returns, not as a sudden realization, but as a quiet persistence that cannot be resolved. The system does not attempt to fill it. It moves around it. She continues with the same steady pace, though her attention now extends further into the pattern, ensuring that what remains aligned does not falter. Her role becomes more contained, more focused on preserving continuity rather than guiding movement outwardly. Behind her, the airmen continue to adapt, their movements becoming more consistent despite the disruption. The learning that has carried them thus far now supports them through this altered condition, allowing them to maintain the rhythm even as its structure changes. You begin to understand that the system is not designed to prevent breaks. It is designed to survive them. The loss of a segment does not end the movement. It reshapes it, forcing it to continue in a form that carries the absence without resolving it. The ground beneath them shifts again, though subtly, requiring adjustments that are absorbed into the movement without drawing attention. The system continues to respond to the environment as it always has, integrating each variation into its structure. The air grows quieter still, as if the movement itself has become more contained, less expansive. Sound remains controlled, each step placed with the same discipline that has defined the passage from the beginning. The absence does not create noise. It deepens the silence. She pauses one final time within this sequence, allowing the system to settle into its new form. The figures behind her follow, each holding the pause within their own moment, preserving the pattern that prevents synchronization. The structure holds, though it is no longer what it was. You watch as the movement continues, its rhythm sustained, its form intact, though altered by what has been lost. The system does not return to its previous state. It carries forward, shaped by the absence that remains within it. And within that altered continuity, the passage persists, unbroken in appearance, though no longer whole. Continuation without completion. The movement continues, though it no longer seeks to restore what has been lost. The absence has settled into the structure, no longer felt as disruption, but as part of the condition that defines how the system now holds. The rhythm persists, though it carries a slight imbalance, one that does not resolve, but does not prevent continuation. She moves forward with the same measured precision, though her presence now feels more contained within the pattern rather than guiding it from ahead. The system no longer depends on correction. It depends on preservation. Each step reinforces what remains, not by replacing what is missing, but by maintaining the continuity that still exists. The land stretches outward once more, offering a space that is neither fully open nor fully concealed. It allows distance to extend again, restoring the separation that reduces visibility, though now that distance carries a different quality. It feels less stable, more dependent on careful maintenance, as if the structure that holds it requires constant attention to remain intact. Behind her, the figures follow, their movements aligned with a pattern that continues despite its incompleteness. The gap remains, not visible, but present in the way the rhythm unfolds. Each step falls into place, though something within the sequence does not return. The system does not attempt to fill it. It continues around it. You begin to notice how the environment offers no acknowledgement of this altered state. The ground remains consistent in its variation, shifting between surfaces that require attention without providing relief. The air carries the same quiet density, holding sound close without allowing it to travel far. Nothing in the landscape reflects the internal change that has occurred. The body adapts to this new condition without conscious effort. What was once learned through repetition now extends into preservation. Each movement becomes a reinforcement of structure, maintaining alignment even as the system itself has shifted. The effort is not reduced. It is redistributed, focused more on continuity than on progression. She pauses briefly, though the pause now feels different. It is less about alignment and more about maintaining balance within the altered rhythm. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause within their own moment, preserving the fragmentation that continues to protect the movement. You sense how time changes again within this condition. It no longer stretches in the same way, nor does it compress. It settles into something steady, unbroken, defined by continuation rather than by segments. The absence does not interrupt this flow. It becomes part of it. The land begins to shift subtly, though the changes are gradual. A slight variation in elevation, a change in the density of the ground, a faint alteration in the air that suggests a different terrain ahead. These changes are absorbed into the movement without altering its pace significantly. The system continues to respond as it has, integrating each variation into its structure. Behind her, the airmen move with a consistency that reflects their full adaptation to the system. Their earlier hesitation is no longer present. Their steps align with the rhythm without conscious adjustment. The learning that began with observation has become embedded, guiding their movement even as the system itself has changed. You begin to understand that continuation here is not tied to completion. There is no expectation that what has been lost will be restored, no anticipation that the system will return to its original form. It persists because it can, because the conditions that allow it to continue remain intact. The ground levels again, offering a brief sense of ease that does not alter the movement significantly. The body adjusts, extending slightly, but the rhythm remains controlled, contained within the same discipline that has carried it through every condition. She continues forward, her presence steady within the pattern, though less defined by direction and more by consistency. The system moves with her, not as something she leads, but as something she maintains. Behind her, the figures follow, their movements now fully integrated into the structure that persists despite its incompleteness. The distance between them holds, the rhythm continues, the silence remains unbroken. You watch as the movement carries forward through this space, its form intact, its continuity preserved, though no longer whole. And within that continuation, the system persists, moving forward without resolution, sustained by a pattern that does not require completion. The movement settles into a form that no longer resists what it has become. The earlier tension, the quiet effort to preserve alignment, to compensate for what is missing, begins to dissolve into something steadier, not because the absence has been resolved, but because it has been fully absorbed. The system no longer reacts to it. It moves with it. She continues without altering her pace, though the quality of her movement shifts in a way that is difficult to define. The precision remains, the discipline unchanged, but the adjustments become fewer, less visible. What once required constant correction now holds itself more naturally, as if the pattern has adapted to its own incompleteness. Behind her, the figures follow with the same consistency, their movements aligned not only with the rhythm, but with the altered structure that carries it forward. The gap that remains no longer disrupts the sequence. It exists within it, shaping the intervals without breaking them. Each step falls into place, not because the pattern is whole, but because it has learned to continue without being so. You begin to notice how the environment reflects this quiet stabilization, not by changing, but by offering conditions that no longer require constant adjustment. The ground, though still varied, feels less demanding, as if the body has adapted to its inconsistencies fully. The air carries sound in the same restrained way, but it no longer feels as immediate, as if the perception of it has shifted rather than the sound itself. The distance between the figures holds more easily now. It no longer requires the same level of attention to maintain. The pull toward compression has faded, replaced by a steadier sense of spacing that aligns with the movement without conscious effort. The system has rebalanced itself, not by restoring what was lost, but by redistributing what remains. She pauses again, though the pause is almost indistinguishable from the movement itself. It does not interrupt. It exists within the rhythm, allowing the system to maintain its continuity without drawing attention to the act of alignment. The figures behind her follow in sequence, each holding the pause within their own moment, preserving the fragmentation that defines their passage. You sense how the concept of loss changes within this condition. It is no longer an event. It is not something that occurred at a specific point in time. It has become part of the ongoing state of movement, integrated into every step that follows. The system does not remember it in a way that alters behavior. It carries it as a constant, unspoken presence. The land begins to shift once more, though gently, offering a new variation that must be integrated into the movement. A slight change in elevation, a difference in the texture of the ground, a subtle alteration in the air that suggests a transition into another space. These changes are absorbed without disruption, shaping the movement without breaking it. Behind her, the airmen continue to move with a consistency that reflects their full integration into the system. Their earlier learning is no longer visible as effort. It has become part of how they exist within the movement, guiding their actions without requiring attention. You begin to understand that the system does not seek to resolve itself. It does not aim for completion. It exists to continue, to carry forward through conditions that cannot be controlled, adapting as necessary without altering its fundamental structure. The ground opens slightly, offering a wider space that allows the distance between figures to extend further. This extension does not disrupt the rhythm. It reinforces it, allowing the system to distribute itself more fully across the landscape, reducing visibility while maintaining connection. She continues forward, her presence steady within the pattern, though no longer defined by the need to adjust or correct. The movement holds without intervention, sustained by the structure that has adapted to its own incompleteness. Behind her, the figures follow, their movements aligned, their spacing consistent, their rhythm unbroken. The system persists, not because it is whole, but because it no longer requires itself to be. You watch as the movement carries forward into this open space, its form intact, its continuity preserved, its absence fully integrated. And within that quiet persistence, the passage continues, sustained by a pattern that does not end, only extends. Epilogue. What remains after passage? The movement does not end where it seems to. There is no final step that separates it from what comes after, no clear point where the system dissolves and the world resumes its usual shape. Instead, it fades gradually, not into absence, but into something less defined. The rhythm that carried it forward begins to loosen, its precision softening as the conditions that required it begin to fall away. And yet, even as it recedes, it does not disappear entirely. The land remains. Fields stretch outward as they did before, holding no visible trace of what has passed through them. The ground, marked only briefly by weight, has already returned to itself. Grass stands upright again. Soil settles. What once carried movement now carries nothing at all, or at least nothing that insists on being seen. The paths that were never fixed do not linger. They exist only in the memory of steps that cannot be retraced. You begin to notice how the absence of the system does not create emptiness. It reveals continuity. The world that held this movement continues without acknowledging it. The same wind crosses the same ground. The same light returns, thinning and strengthening in its own quiet rhythm. The environment does not record what has occurred. It absorbs it. And yet, something remains. Not in the land, but in the way it is understood. The movement, once carried through repetition, leaves behind a different kind of presence. It is not visible. It does not alter the shape of things. But it changes the way silence is held, the way distance is perceived, the way stillness is recognized as something active rather than empty. What has passed through these spaces does not stay, but it does not vanish without consequence. She is no longer seen within this landscape. Her presence, once steady and contained within the system, does not extend beyond it. The role she held dissolves with the structure that required it. There is no continuation of her movement here, no trace that leads forward. And yet, the pattern she maintained persists in a different form, carried not by her, but by the system that extended beyond any single person. You begin to understand that what was witnessed was never confined to one path, one sequence, one passage. It existed across distances that could not be fully seen, carried by others who moved within the same condition, guided by the same quiet discipline. The system was never whole in a way that could be observed. It was always fragmented, always dispersed, always sustained through continuation rather than completion. The absence that emerged within it does not resolve here. It remains part of what was carried forward, part of the structure that adapted to loss without restoring it. What was missing does not return. It does not need to, for the system to have persisted. The continuation itself was the resolution, though it did not feel like one. The air moves gently across the ground, carrying no sound that can be distinguished as part of what has passed. The silence that remains is not empty. It holds the memory of restraint, of movement shaped by what could not be seen. It carries a weight that is no longer present, yet not entirely gone. You sense how the story does not conclude in the way stories often do. There is no final image that gathers meaning into a single point. No moment where everything that has occurred is brought together and resolved. Instead, it disperses, much like the movement itself, leaving behind fragments that do not assemble into a single, complete form. And perhaps that is what remains most clearly. Not the path, not the destination, but the condition, the quiet discipline of moving through a world that could not be occupied openly, the trust carried without faces, the distance held without losing connection, the continuation that did not depend on completion. The land holds none of this in a way that can be seen. But you do. And as the light shifts once more, soft and unhurried, returning to the same muted tones that began this passage, the space settles into itself again, unchanged and yet not entirely the same. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.